Muslims, but they have moved a long way from the Sunni ideal of a direct personal relationship with God. Saudi Arabia has its own clerical hierarchy, and the dominant religious message here is a form of Wahhabi Islam, which represents the views of only a small minority of Muslims.
من وجدتموه يعمل عمل قوم لوط فاقتلوا الفاعل والمفعول رجلين يضربان بالسيف ثم يوضعان على نعش ويحرق النعش.
الحقيقة أن الجهاد الذي وقع في الفلوجة يرفع الرأس وتضرب رقاب وتنسف جماجم. هذا خط النصر والشهادة والتضحية.
By controlling the theological heart of Islam, as well being flushed with petrodollars, they've been able to impose their strict, rigid, narrow, sectarian, divisive interpretation of Islam on the whole Muslim community, international community. And this has been a tremendous tragedy for all of us.
The Wahhabists of Saudi Arabia nurtured the Taliban and permitted the destruction of one of the most ancient sites in the world, the magnificent Buddha statues in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was raised in the Wahhabist faith, and 15 of the 19 terrorists responsible for 9/11 were of Saudi origin.
Over the past 20 years or so, it has been argued that over $100 billion has been expended by the Saudi government in propagating their version of Islam across the world. New mosques, madrasas, Muslim teachers, imams, school textbooks, literature have all been shaped by a Wahhabi agenda.
And over the centuries, interpretations and editions have filled hundreds of thousands of volumes. There are the scholarly commentaries and the Hadith, the collected sayings and deeds of the Prophet. The Islamic legal system, the Sharia, is based on the Quran and the Hadith, where some of the harshest punishments are laid down, like death by stoning for adultery, which is not mentioned in the Quran.
The hadith were all compiled and collected some 250 to 350 years after the death of the Prophet. Many of them are forged or fabricated and have been called into question. Unfortunately, however, many Muslims consider the hadith to be co-equal with the Quran, but clearly that is not so. The Quran makes quite clear that it is the ultimate text. Anything else cannot be on the same level.
But even the Quran is vulnerable to change and distortion, if not in its original Arabic, then certainly in translation. The King Fahd printing press in Medina, Saudi Arabia has the capacity to publish 10 million Qurans a year in Arabic and 44 other languages. These are distributed around the world well below cost, and in some cases free of charge. And it's fascinating to see how the Saudi religious establishment has augmented the text. They have inserted in brackets, such as the Jews and such as the Christians, into verses that refer to people who have earned God's anger and gone astray, and into the verse calling upon the faithful to make their armaments ready against the enemies of Islam. The translator has made another insertion: tanks, planes, missiles, and artillery.
What you have got are modern armaments set within the Quran itself. And interesting enough, in the introduction to this, and it is by a notable leader in Saudi, you have a justification for violent conflict, jihad, for suicide bombing, and it is stated clearly that the Quran is the perfect model for warfare.
Any suggestion of distortion in the text is highly contentious because of the special significance of the Quran in the minds of Muslims. Unlike most Christians and Jews who believe their sacred texts were authored by men inspired by God, Muslims believe the Quran is the Word of God as dictated to the Prophet Muhammad. This distinction means that critical analysis of the sacred texts becomes an extremely sensitive issue when applied to the Quran. And the problem is compounded when some of the scholars making the attempt are Western non-Muslims. Are they really in a position to shed new light on the text and its origins? In 1972, during the restoration of the Great Mosque of Sana'a, capital of North Yemen, workers discovered piles of old parchments in the loft between the inner and outer roofs. The entire load was stuffed into some 20 potato sacks, where it might have remained were it not for the arrival 7 years later of Dr. Gerd Puin, a German scholar and Quranic expert.
Huh?